You might have heard the term healthy cell, healthy body, and that is absolutely true. That's what we're going to be working on this month. Hi, I'm Dr. Peter Minke. This is Minke Wellness. And my training is as a cell biologist, so I get really geeky about this, but I'm going to try to keep this down at the level that is relevant to most people, okay? So let's talk about the cell. We're saying we're made up of some 15 trillion cells, and then there's another some trillion cells of bacteria in our gut, which are not part of our body, but you know they are included in our mass because they travel with us. But so these cells are all kinds of different sizes and shapes, right? They have all different needs. We wouldn't look any different. We would just look like one big blob if we didn't have different cell types. So one of the things that we talk about when we talk about cells is that there's a lot of variation in those, in the shape and the function. I mean, we have nerve cells that run from our spine all the way down to the tip of our toes. So for me, 3 feet long. We've got one cell 3 feet long. Obviously, it's extremely thin and potentially fragile, but it has to transport material from the cell body up in the spine 3 feet down a little tiny fiber. It has to actually move material down there. That's pretty, so transport inside that cell is very, very important compared to a cheek cell that's just this little ball or a little cube, or maybe a little rectangle. And so, you got different, obviously very, very different cell types. You have some cell types that are sitting in the thyroid or in the stomach that are producing a whole bunch of stuff and exporting it and pushing it out outside the cell. The connective tissue cells are doing that same thing, producing a lot of protein, pushing it outside the cell. So in that kind of context, the machinery designed for production and export of material is very important to those cells. The reason I'm bringing this up is because there are different chemicals and toxins and exposures that affect the cells in different pathways and different things. And so you end up with different symptoms based on a different toxin. Okay, does that start to make sense? In other words, a toxin like a metal that's going to affect transport inside the cell, right? Go a long distance. That's going to be that's going to be one aspect of neurotoxicity because those are heavy metals like for example, lead and mercury will disrupt that transport of material around this inside the cell. If you have a small cell, well, if you disrupt that transport, it doesn't have very far to go, so it can still function. So you'll still keep a certain function of one type of cell, but you'll lose a function on another type of cell based on the bias of what system or what part of the cellular machinery is being affected. Okay, so when we talk about our wellness strategy from a standpoint of how can we apply our wellness strategy? Well, what's our wellness strategy? Stop poisoning our cells. Well, how do we stop poisoning our cells? Right? What is cellular toxin? Well, pretty much everything we've been talking about all along the way on this wellness course, if it's a toxin, if it's something bad for us, then it's bad for our cells, and it's affecting us at a cellular level. So really, there's not any different discussion, but we can start to talk about or understand a little bit better how one type of toxin is affecting the body and creating a set of symptoms, and then a different kind of toxin is affecting the cells in a different way and creating a different kind of symptom because those cell tissue types are being affected in that pathway, and that pathway is more important or more obvious when you have a small toxicity in that, well, you're going to hit that system. Okay, so, but what it comes down to is if we have a little bit more understanding, and you know how I like the breathing, we can do our breathing, we can encourage our body at a cellular level. Okay, so now let's peek into the cell. I'm not going to even show you a picture because the problem I have with the pictures of cells is that we have this idea of, we get this model of a cell as a big balloon, and then we have a little nucleus inside, and well, there aren't any cells that look like that. They're all either flat or shaped, or and they don't operate alone. They're sandwiched next to each other, and the membrane system is actually continuous with the neighbor. Okay, so there's actually little membrane bridges that are open up in between the cells, and they didn't know this when the early, until way advanced microscopy, because what would happen is once you kill, like say you take a sample of tissue and you put formaldehyde on it to kill it and fix it, and so that you can kind of study it. Well, studying a dead tissue isn't the same as studying live tissue. The whole structure changes when you kill it. And so this is the problem I have with gross anatomy in medical school, is that the doctors are spending a lot of time studying a dead body and getting their understanding of structure, especially of the fascial system, from a dead body. And the fascial system degrades quickly and changes structure dramatically once it dehydrates and dies. Whereas when you're dealing with living fascia, it's a living, breathing tissue that wraps every organ in the body, and we've talked about that. We've talked about just about all these things throughout the course this year, but what I'm saying is I'm kind of trying to put it all together here and talk about it from a cellular perspective. So what is our wellness strategy? Stop poisoning ourselves, stop poisoning our cells, in this case for this month. Feed the cells, flood the cells with nutrients, and manage the stress within the cells, which is to say, even though we're talking about, you could talk about stress at the single cell layer, and that could be physical stress. If I put too much pressure on it, it's going to hurt. It could be chemical stress. It could be environmental, the environment of the cell itself. But let's look at the cell, just kind of peek in there. What's inside a cell? What do we need? If we're talking about flooding the cell with nutrients, what does the cell need? What are we talking about? Well, okay, let's go from the outside in. We've got a cell that's wrapped in membranes. Well, what's membranes? That's phospholipid. It's fatty acids, and so it's fat. It's made of fat. Our essential oils are fat soluble, so that's why they travel immediately into the cell. So they're one of the most bioavailable nutrients we can find, because it goes all the way in. And then once it hits the outside of the cell, there's actually a membrane system that connects to, remember I said transport. Well, transport inside the cell is done by Golgi apparatus and endoplasmic reticulum. Well, all that is a membrane system. It's like the digestive system of the cell, and it has membrane tubes, and those membranes all continuous, and it goes all the way to the nucleus. So, and the DNA is connected to the membrane inside the nucleus. So basically anything that can access the cell from the membranes or through fat actually can work its way all the way to the DNA. That's true for the good and the bad, right? If you have gasoline or alcohol or certain waxes and things like that, if the waxes tend to be too big, but if those things get into our bodies, they're fat-soluble toxins. Now you add to that these industrial chemicals like phthalates and things like that are fat-soluble toxins. They travel into the body through the fat. They have the same avenue that essential oils do, and they can get in there and they can get to the DNA and they can get to all the cellular machinery. So that's why it's important to not get fat-soluble toxins, to avoid those. And those are going to be a lot of your petrochemicals, a lot of the things that you see as ingredients in our foods and in our personal care products can show up as fat-soluble toxins, and those are industrial byproducts for the most part, but sometimes we put them in deliberately as preservatives, and that's BHT, butyl toluene, very, very toxic stuff. In fact, it's so bad that we don't even have to put it in the food. We just put it in the packaging, and it's enough to keep the food from spoiling. Okay, so I'd rather have food that spoils and eat it fairly quickly instead of having something sit on my shelf for months on end. A little aside. Okay, so we've got the outside of the cells made of fat. Well, when we go inside inside, let's say all the way to the DNA, what's DNA made of? It's deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay, well it's kind of basically made out of amino acids. We've got these DNA base pairs that kind of are in that same pathway as amino acids. We have sugar and phosphate. Okay, so we need our phosphate, we need phosphorus, we need our minerals. Okay, we've got to have our minerals. Trace minerals come in with enzymes. We need zinc and manganese and even molybdenum and cobalt and other types of lithium, other types of metals in rare amounts. You don't need a lot of them, but need some. So we need our trace minerals, and then we need our sugars, right? So we have trace sugars, our essential sugars, what they call essential sugars, but we need these ribose, right? We need to have our mannose and some of these other things. These are all part of the sugars in cell systems, cell signaling systems. And of course we need our protein. And so basically what we have inside the cell is the same thing that we talk about in our diet. We've got our fats, we've got our carbohydrates, we've got our protein, okay? That's what makes up our cells. And so you've heard this before with, we are what we eat. Well, this is absolutely directly true. So if we eat crappy fat, guess what ends up in our cells? Crappy fat. When we eat junky sugar or only one type of sugar, guess what? It ends up hitting our cells. Just that kind of sugar. And we miss out on all the other sugars, right? When we take bathtub vitamins, we take a D-alpha tocopherol supplement, and all we get is one type of vitamin E, and when there's actually 7 or even 11 different types of vitamin E's that occur in nature, we need all those forms of vitamin E that come from nature. We don't need just one single form that some scientists developed and found out about and put in a supplement. So we need to have a broad spectrum. Our food needs to be our main source. Unfortunately, we're not getting that in our food supply. So we do supplement, but we should be supplementing natural products that come from nature. We're just biasing what nature has produced and getting it into a form that's convenient for our modern lives because we're busy running around and we like to continue running around. Okay. So what I'm saying here is this whole, in an overview here, we're going to be talking a little bit about how each of these parts of the cells can be fed. We can breathe into them and pay attention to them. So we'll talk again. I know we talked a little bit about mitochondria when we were in the muscle system. We talked about DNA in a variety of different ways, but we're going to talk a little bit more about DNA. We're going to talk about the whole process of what happens inside the cell and then when it goes wrong. There are these processes. If you read the work by the Environmental Working Group, they talk about cancer, development of cancer from a cellular perspective. It's really not necessarily a one-time thing. We have these cancer hallmark processes. These are processes of inside the cell that if they go wrong, maybe not any one of them, if it gets affected, it's gonna produce cancer. But if you affect enough of these things all at once with a myriad, a chemical cocktail of toxins, then you end up moving the body toward cancer, even though each of those individual chemicals are relatively innocent and can get approved by the FDA in our food and our personal care products. When you accumulate all the little influences of those, 50, 60, 100, 300 different chemicals that we have actually already stored up in our body from our chemical environment, then we end up with a situation that could lead to cancer, even though, like I said, none of those are individually carcinogenic. So we'll talk a little bit more about that and what we can do about it. And then we'll look at not just inside the cell, but outside the cell. We have extracellular matrix, which we talked a little bit about during the connective tissue part when we talked about bones and muscles. And along the way, we've been talking skin. When we were talking about the skin, we talked about connective tissue. So there's a lot of different things. And we're also going to talk about stem cells and things like that. Nerve cells and stem cells. I've also and so we're going to talk about at a cellular level what's going on for all those things. So I look forward to working with you on that. And we will be talking about how to implement our program, which is a fairly simple program. Our multigreens, our Ningxia Red, our Citrus Fresh Vitality, and then doing raindrop therapy, which we'll have a whole section just on that, okay? So let's get started with our program for December. Happy Wellness, one day at a time. And keep in mind, our wellness strategy is still being applied. Stop poisoning our cells, flood the cells with nutrients, and manage their stress. So breathe in and feel oxygen and water getting to all of our cells. That is the primary nutrient that we need to work with. Send water, send oxygen to each one of your cells. And if you want to focus on one area or one type of cell or even one cellular process, send oxygen and water into your DNA. DNA has to be hydrated just like anything else. So we'll talk more and we'll do some of this breathing that targets all the way deep inside the cell. Okay, happy wellness.